Eva Carter couldn't remember how long she'd been here. Time lost meaning when pain dictated reality. The bright surgical lamps overhead hummed, their sterile glow highlighting the blood that trailed down her arms, dripping onto the cold metal slab beneath her. She refused to scream. High Inquisitor Vero Rylus loomed above, his reptilian features twisted in something between amusement and impatience. His dark ceremonial robes were immaculate, untouched by the suffering he inflicted. The torture chamber smelled of antiseptic and burned flesh, hers. "You humans are persistent," Vero mused, selecting a delicate, needle-thin instrument from the tray beside him. "But persistence is not endurance. You will break." Eva lifted her head, cracked lips curving into a weak smirk. "That's what the last guy said." Vero's expression didn't change, but she caught the flicker of irritation in his golden eyes. Good. She wasn't here to win a battle of strength, only to waste his time. The more she resisted, the longer the Terran resistance had to move unseen. He inserted the needle just beneath her ribcage, the machine at his side emitting a soft whine as it pulsed electrical currents into her nervous system. White-hot agony. Her muscles locked, back arching against the restraints. She tasted copper, her own blood from biting the inside of her cheek. The pain wasn't just unbearable, it was precise, designed to hit every receptor in sequence, allowing no moment of relief. Vero watched, fascinated. "It's remarkable, really. Lesser species fold long before this point." He adjusted the settings, intensifying the current. "Tell me, Lieutenant Carter, what is the Resistance planning on Kelros for?" Eva forced a laugh, though it came out ragged. "Wouldn't you like to know?" His sigh was theatrical. He pressed a switch. The pain vanished instantly. Eva gasped, blinking against the sudden absence of torture. Her body twitched involuntarily, muscles still raw from abuse. Vero leaned in, voice low. "You believe this is a test of strength? It isn't. It's a measure of time. You will talk eventually. The only question is how long you will suffer before you do." She met his gaze, unwavering. "Longer than you'd like." His lips pressed into a thin line. Without a word, he gestured to the two armored guards at the chamber entrance. "Take her back to containment. We resume at first cycle." The restraints released. Eva's limbs were dead weight, uncooperative. The guards seized her arms, dragging her upright. Every movement ignited fresh pain, but she refused to give Vero the satisfaction of seeing her falter. As they hauled her toward the exit, the Inquisitor called after her, voice smooth. "You should have taken my kindness when it was offered. Tomorrow, we forego the formalities." They threw her into the cell like discarded cargo. The impact rattled her bones, but she barely reacted. She had endured worse. The door hissed shut behind them, locking her in absolute silence. The walls were smooth, featureless steel, no corners to hide in, no vents to manipulate. Just her, the dim red lighting, and time. Eva let herself collapse onto the floor. Her body screamed, every nerve burned raw. But she had survived. That was enough. She forced measured breaths, drawing from muscle memory, blocking out the pain. The Resistance trained their operatives for scenarios like this, but training didn't account for the moments in between, the unbearable quiet, the creeping exhaustion, the way the mind begged for relief. She would not break. She pressed her forehead against the floor, letting the cool metal ground her. Every minute she endured was a minute stolen from the Empire's plans. She clung to that thought like a lifeline. Time passed. Maybe an hour. Maybe longer. Then, the door slid open. Footsteps. Not Vero's. Someone lighter, quicker. A medic? A tall, thin figure entered, dressed in a technician's uniform. They knelt beside her, gloved hands reaching. Eva forced herself to sit up. "If you're here to fix me, don't waste your time." The technician hesitated, then murmured, "Not fix. Examine." Their voice was neutral, but something in their posture betrayed unease. Eva frowned. "Why?" The technician didn't answer. Instead, they pulled out a scanner, running it over her torso. The device emitted a soft chime. They stared at the readings, brow furrowing. Eva watched them carefully. Not what you expected? The technician glanced at the doorway, as if afraid of being overheard. Then, barely above a whisper, your body should have shut down from shock hours ago. Eva's stomach tightened. She had pushed her limits before, but she wasn't invincible. What were they seeing? The technician stood abruptly, exiting without another word. The door sealed shut behind them. Eva exhaled, pressing a trembling hand to her ribs. Something was wrong. Or maybe, something was different. The next cycle arrived too soon. 2 guards entered. No words. No delay. They grabbed her arms, dragging her back to the chamber. This time, the room was different. The machines remained, but a surgical table had replaced the chair. The restraints were heavier. Vero stood at the center, waiting. His gaze was unreadable. I had planned to continue with standard procedure. He gestured to a display on the wall, a medical scan of her body. But my doctors insist you are unusual. Eva gave a half smirk. You flatter me. Vero's lips twitched in something almost like amusement. Then he turned, pressing a sequence of commands into the control panel. The table adjusted, locking her into place. I wonder, he mused, selecting a scalpel from the tray. How much damage can you withstand before your body fails? Eva forced her breathing to steady. This would be worse than before. Vero stepped closer, the blade glinting under the artificial light. Shall we find out? The first cut was shallow. The second deeper. The pain came swift, sharp, relentless. Eva gritted her teeth. She would not scream. Not yet. Not ever. The agony lasted for hours. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she clung to consciousness. She couldn't afford to fade. Not here. Not in front of him. At some point, she realized Vero was speaking. His voice was distant, as if underwater. Fascinating, truly. You should be dead by now. He sounded intrigued. Almost disappointed. Eva's lips barely moved, but the words came anyway. Try harder. Vero exhaled sharply, unimpressed. Then he pressed something cold against her chest. A shock stick. The voltage surged. Her heart stuttered. Then nothing. Eva's world collapsed into black. She didn't know how much time had passed when she woke. All she knew was that she was still here. Still breathing. And that shouldn't have been possible. Pain was the first thing Eva felt. A deep, raw ache spread through her body, pulsing with every sluggish beat of her heart. But she had a heartbeat. She was breathing. That wasn't right. She should have been dead. Eva opened her eyes to dim fluorescent lighting. The cold metal beneath her was different from the interrogation slab, softer, padded. She was in a medical bay. Straps bound her wrists and ankles to the cot, tight enough to prevent movement but not circulation. A quiet beeping reached her ears. Monitors surrounded her, tracking vitals that should have flatlined. The door hissed open. Vero Rylas stepped inside, his usual composure replaced by something new. Not anger. Not amusement. Curiosity. Remarkable, he said, voice smooth as ever. You're alive. Eva swallowed against the dryness in her throat. Disappointed? His lips twitched. That depends. What are you? Eva forced a smirk. Just a girl who doesn't know when to quit. Vero didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the monitors, fingers trailing across the console. You were dead, Lieutenant. No pulse, no brain activity. For 40 minutes. He turned to face her. Then you weren't. She remained silent. Vero leaned closer, eyes sharp. Tell me, is this some biological anomaly of your species? Or something engineered? Eva met his gaze, unflinching. You think we'd let you capture someone that valuable? His expression darkened, but the frustration she expected never came. Instead, he tilted his head, considering. I have interrogated thousands, he mused. I know when someone is lying. Eva kept her breathing steady. The best lies were mostly true. She had no idea how she'd survived. But she wasn't about to admit that. Vero tapped a button on the console. A screen flickered to life, displaying medical scans. Images of her heart, brain, nervous system. Patterns of electrical activity that shouldn't exist. "You weren't simply revived," he said. "Your body regenerated damaged tissue. Neural pathways restructured themselves. No known species in the Empire has this capability." Eva stared at the scans, trying to make sense of them. Her heart rate remained steady, her body showing no signs of the trauma she had endured. The pain lingered, but it was fading, as though her body was still repairing itself. She swallowed hard. "Maybe I'm just lucky," Vero exhaled, almost amused. "Luck doesn't rewrite biology." A new figure entered, one of the Empire's medical officers, a gaunt-faced alien with dark, lidless eyes. He carried a data pad, his expression unreadable. "My lord," he said to Vero, "we have analyzed the subject's cellular structure." Eva tensed. The officer hesitated, as if unsure of his own findings. "It appears adaptive." Vero frowned. "Explain." The officer flicked through the datapad. "Her cells regenerate at an accelerated rate. Not instantly, but at a speed far beyond normal biological healing. More than that, they seem to respond to trauma by strengthening themselves." Eva's pulse quickened. Vero's gaze sharpened. "You mean she's evolving?" The officer nodded. "In a manner of speaking. Every time she sustains damage, her body adjusts, learning from the injury. Even neural decay is reversed, suggesting a level of biological resilience unseen in any known species." Silence hung between them. Then Vero smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Eva forced herself to remain still. She had seen that expression before, on scientists who had just discovered something they could exploit. "She's more than a prisoner now," Vero murmured. "She's a specimen." Eva clenched her jaw. "You really know how to make a girl feel special." Vero ignored her. He turned to the officer. "Run further tests. I want to know if this trait is unique to her or a potential trait of her species." The officer hesitated. "My lord, further tests would require more extreme conditions." Vero barely blinked. "Then apply them." Eva's stomach twisted. She'd been tortured before, but this would be different. This wasn't about breaking her, it was about studying her, treating her like an experiment. She needed to act. Now. The next few hours blurred together. They moved her to a sterile lab, replacing the interrogation room with something far colder. Machines whirred, scanning her from every angle. Needles extracted samples of her blood. Doctors murmured to one another in languages she didn't understand. Eva focused on what she could control. She noted security placements, memorized guard rotations. Counted how long it took for the scans to complete. Then, an opportunity. During one test, they removed her restraints, attaching her to a neural scanner. For a few seconds, her hands were free. She struck. Her fist connected with the nearest doctor's throat. He staggered back, choking. She ripped a syringe from the table, jamming it into the second scientist's neck. The tranquilizer meant for her took him down instantly. Alarms blared. Guards rushed in. Eva spun, using the unconscious doctor as a shield. A bolt of energy struck him instead of her. She grabbed a fallen scalpel, slashed at another guard's exposed arm. More entered. Too many. A shock baton struck her ribs. Electricity surged through her, locking her muscles. She collapsed, gasping. Vero entered the lab, looking almost disappointed. Predictable. Two guards grabbed her arms, hauling her upright. Vero stepped closer, gaze assessing. But impressive. He studied her for a moment before nodding to the medics. Prepare for the next phase. Eva gritted her teeth. You can cut me open all you want, she growled. It won't change what I am. Vero smiled. That's precisely what I intend to find out. The guards dragged her back to the table, strapping her down. As the machines powered on, Eva took a slow breath. They wanted to know what she was. So did she. But one thing was certain. She would make them regret asking. Eva lay motionless on the examination table, cold restraints locking her wrists and ankles in place. Overhead, mechanical arms clicked and whirred, their instruments gleaming under the harsh surgical lights. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the lab, but beneath it lurked the unmistakable metallic tang of her own blood. She wasn't afraid. Fear was a waste of energy. Vero Rylas stood at the foot of the table, hands clasped behind his back. His golden eyes studied her with measured intrigue. "You're an anomaly," he mused. "A mystery wrapped in flesh." Eva forced a smirk. "Didn't realize you were a poet." Vero ignored the jab, nodding toward the lead medical officer. "Proceed." A robotic arm descended, a fine needle pressing against the skin over her sternum. The machine hummed as it extracted another sample, withdrawing dark crimson liquid into a vial. The doctor examined it, brows furrowed. "Fascinating. The cellular structures are already shifting. Adapting." Eva clenched her jaw. She still didn't understand what was happening to her. The pain of torture should have left her broken. Instead, her body had repaired itself, wounds closing far faster than human biology allowed. But this wasn't just healing, something deeper was changing. She flexed her fingers, feeling strength return faster than it should. The doctor placed the vial into a scanning device. The screen flickered, displaying a series of complex molecular patterns. He stiffened. "My lord," he whispered. "Her cells are consuming foreign matter. Integrating it." Vero's gaze sharpened. "Explain." The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Her body isn't just healing. It's learning. Every injury strengthens her. The trauma doesn't just repair, it evolves." Vero said nothing for a moment. Then, he stepped closer, eyes gleaming with something new. "Greed. Then let's give her something to learn from," he murmured. A sharp hiss filled the air. A second robotic arm extended, this one holding a slender scalpel. The blade touched her forearm, slicing through skin and muscle in a precise, surgical line. Blood welled instantly. Eva inhaled sharply but gave no reaction. She couldn't stop what was coming, but she could control how they saw her. The doctor watched the wound, fascinated. "Look, already closing. The tissue is restructuring itself at an unnatural rate." Vero observed in silence. Then, without warning, he grabbed a nearby shock baton and pressed it against the open wound. Agony tore through her. Eva gasped, her back arching involuntarily. The electricity seared her flesh, but instead of lingering damage, the skin darkened, hardened. The raw pain faded faster than it should. Vero pulled the baton away, studying the wound. The fresh skin was different. Slightly tougher. More resistant. Eva swallowed. She felt it too. The next time he did that, it would hurt less. She could feel herself changing. And she wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. They continued the test for hours. Each injury, each stimulus, made her stronger. Deeper cuts sealed within minutes. Burns healed before their eyes. When they injected her with a controlled toxin, her body neutralized it faster than their scanners could register. Vero was ecstatic. Eva remained silent, processing. If her body was adapting, she needed to use that. Not just to endure, but to fight. She couldn't afford to be a lab rat forever. She needed a way out. The next morning, a new figure entered her cell. Not Vero. The technician from before, the one who had first noticed something was different. They hesitated, glancing at the security camera in the corner. Then, in a swift motion, they deactivated it. The red light blinked out. Eva sat up, muscles still aching from the previous session. "That's a bold move." The technician exhaled. "Listen carefully. You need to escape. Now." Eva's eyes narrowed. "Why the sudden concern?" The technician's expression darkened. "Vero doesn't just want to study you anymore. He wants to replicate you. He's already ordered experiments on human prisoners to see if they can trigger the same response." A cold rage settled in Eva's gut. She leaned forward. "How many prisoners?" The technician hesitated. 5. So far. Eva clenched her fists. If Vero was trying to force this mutation onto others, it meant he didn't just want to understand it, he wanted to weaponize it. And that couldn't happen. She forced herself to focus. Do you have a plan? The technician nodded. There's a supply transfer scheduled in 2 hours. Security will be thinner near the docking bay. I can disable the cameras along the route. Eva flexed her fingers, feeling the residual strength humming beneath her skin. It was now or never. Then let's go, she said. The escape was fast. Too fast. Eva moved through the corridors like a shadow, the technician guiding her through restricted sections, past distracted guards. Her body felt lighter, faster, each step more precise than the last. It was working. She was becoming something more. The docking bay was in sight when alarms blared. A voice echoed over the intercom. Subject has escaped containment. All units converge on docking bay 4. Eva cursed. Guess they caught on. The technician paled. You need to run. She didn't argue. The first guards rounded the corner, weapons raised. Eva didn't hesitate. She moved before they could fire, closing the distance in a blink. The first soldier barely registered her presence before she struck, an elbow to the throat, a sharp kick to the ribs. He collapsed. The second fired. She dodged, the plasma bolt grazing her arm. The pain was brief, fading even as she moved. Her body adjusted. She disarmed him with a brutal twist, spinning the rifle in her hands. The next 2 guards fell before they could react. The technician stared. That shouldn't be possible. Eve ignored them. Keep moving. They reached the docking bay doors. The technician input a code. The metal hissed open, revealing a sleek transport ship prepped for departure. Then, a slow clap. Vero stepped into view, flanked by a dozen soldiers. Impressive, he admitted. Truly. Eva tightened her grip on the stolen rifle. Move, she warned. Vero tilted his head. Why would I do that? You've proven everything I needed to know. You're not just human anymore, are you? She said nothing. He smirked. You can run, Lieutenant Carter. But this isn't over. Whatever you've become, it belongs to me now. Eva leveled the rifle at him. Come take it, then. Vero chuckled, then gestured. The soldiers raised their weapons. The technician grabbed Eva's arm. No time, get to the ship. Eva made a choice. She fired first. Then she ran. The ship's ramp lifted behind her, engines roaring. Plasma fire followed, scorching the hull as they shot into space. She collapsed into the seat, breath heaving. For the first time in days, she was free. But Vero was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ship hurtled through the void, engines straining against the gravity well of the station. Alarms blared inside the cabin, red warning lights casting flickering shadows across the metal walls. Eva slumped against the co-pilot's seat, muscles burning, breath ragged. The technician, Joran, as he'd finally introduced himself, frantically worked the console, fingers flying over the controls. 3 pursuit ships incoming, he muttered. They're scrambling fighters to intercept. Eva pushed herself up, eyes locking onto the sensor display. The Empire wasn't going to let her escape so easily. The 3 ships were closing fast, their weapons primed. One hit from their cannons would rip the unarmed transport apart. Do we have shields? She asked. Joran grimaced. Not strong enough to hold against sustained fire. Eva exhaled sharply. Then we outrun them. Joran shot her a look. This is a cargo vessel, not a warship. A blast rocked the ship. Metal groaned as the shields absorbed the impact, but the warning display flashed red. Shields down to 60%, Joran called out. Eva pushed him aside, taking the controls. Her hands moved on instinct, weaving the ship into a hard roll, dodging another barrage. Joran's eyes widened. How the hell? Eva didn't answer. Something inside her had shifted. She could feel the movements of the enemy's ships as if they were an extension of her own awareness. Every instinct screamed where to turn, when to juke, how to avoid the next shot. She tightened her grip. She was learning. A second wave of blasts streaked past the hull, barely missing. Eva clenched her jaw. The transport wasn't going to survive much longer. She flicked through the navigational chart. There, a derelict asteroid field just beyond the system's gravity well. "We're heading for the rocks," she announced. Joran paled. "That's suicide." Eva didn't slow. "For them, maybe." The engines roared as she angled the ship toward the asteroid belt. The fighters followed, closing the gap. Plasma bolts rained down, hammering the weakening shields. "Hold together," she muttered under her breath. The first asteroid loomed ahead, a jagged mass of iron and ice. Eva yanked the controls, sending the ship into a tight corkscrew between tumbling debris. The Empire's fighters followed. But they weren't adapting as fast as she was. Eva twisted through the chaos, every movement deliberate. She skimmed past a spinning rock, forcing one of the pursuing ships to bank too hard, straight into an asteroid. It exploded on impact, fiery debris scattering in all directions. Joran gaped. "You're insane." Eva didn't deny it. Another fighter tried to cut her off. She juked right, baiting it closer to a massive drifting boulder. At the last second, she pulled up. The enemy wasn't fast enough. It clipped the rock, spiraling out of control before vanishing in a flash of fire. Only one left. Eva let out a slow breath. She adjusted her trajectory, waiting for the final pilot to make their move. A moment later they fired. She anticipated it, twisting the ship at the perfect angle so the blast struck an asteroid instead. The impact sent the rock tumbling, right into the fighter's path. The enemy ship tried to evade, but it was too late. The collision sent it spinning before erupting into a ball of plasma. The pursuit was over. Silence settled over the cockpit. Joran exhaled, shaking his head. "That shouldn't have worked." Eva turned to him, voice steady. "But it did." Joran studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. "You're not normal." Eva looked down at her hands. They were steady, unshaken. The rush of combat had faded, but something inside her remained sharp. She had changed. And she wasn't done yet. With the fighters gone, the transport limped through space, its engines sputtering. Joran ran diagnostics, muttering curses under his breath. "We're not going to make it far," he admitted. "Damage to the core drive, might hold for a few more jumps at best." Eva frowned. They needed a safe harbor, somewhere the Empire wouldn't immediately track them. "Where's the nearest neutral zone?" she asked. Joran tapped the NAV computer. "There's a station near the outer rim. Black market trading post. They don't ask questions." Eva nodded. "Set the course." Joran hesitated. "And then what?" Eva didn't answer right away. Escaping was just the beginning. Vero wouldn't stop hunting her. He had seen what she could do. He would never let her go. And worse, he would try to replicate it. Eva tightened her fists. She couldn't let that happen. She had been his prisoner. His experiment. Never again. She met Joran's gaze. "Then we prepare." "For what?" Her expression was cold. "For war." Epilogue. The Imperial station floated in the void, a fortress of steel and light. Inside, Vero Rylas stood before a hollow display, watching as sensor footage replayed the battle in the asteroid field. He had underestimated her. A rare mistake. But not one he intended to repeat. The door behind him slid open. A scientist stepped forward, clutching a datapad. "My lord, we've completed the preliminary analysis." Vero turned. "And?" The scientist swallowed. "She is, beyond anything we've encountered. The cellular adaptation isn't just a mutation, it's something entirely new. If we could replicate it." Vero silenced him with a look. "Can we?" A hesitation. "Not yet." Vero exhaled slowly. "Then we find another way." He turned back to the display, watching as Eva's ship disappeared into the stars. "This isn't over, Lieutenant Carter," he murmured. His golden eyes gleamed. "Not by a long shot,"